I read 9 books on small talk to understand how to start and maintain a conversation with anyone. And it's because I severely struggle with small talk. I'm a naturally introverted person, so going for a party with people I don't know is something that my body just rejects. But the more I learn about conversations and the more I try to apply this in safe settings, the more I realize that this, against all my beliefs, can actually be a little fun. So let's get into the 9 books that have helped me become a little better at small talk. The one takeaway from each of these books that you can start applying, and which is the one book that you can begin with to make this journey easier. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Deep from Frantically Speaking. If you want to enhance your communication skills, we release content on this all the time, so hit subscribe. And if you want to take your communications journey to the next level, you can think of booking a free communication consultation with us by clicking on the Calendly link given in the description. You can speak to us to see if we can work together. So we're going to start with 2 books. The one book is very famous, you must have heard of it, and the other one is not that famous. But before I get to what the books are, the main point of both these books is that if we want a conversation to flow and we want the other person to feel like they like talking to us, we need to do something that is a bit of a controversial take. And that is to feed people's egos. I first read this stated very clearly in the book, The Art of Dealing with People, which is the book that you might not have heard of. The book says that the more we can feed people's egos, the higher chances of them having a positive experience in our conversation. And the second book that you might have heard of is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And the book doesn't really say this in these words that we need to feed other people's egos, but the lessons given in the book tend to echo the same principle. And the reason I say this is controversial is because when I read it, I thought, am I supposed to be fake? Just keep complimenting people, not disagree with them? What does this principle really mean? And then both the books tend to clearly highlight that, you should only feed people's egos in a genuine manner. When we are talking to them, be genuinely interested in them, try to avoid criticism, and just speak in a manner that makes the other person feel good, but genuinely. And that felt good in theory, but how do you really do that in practice? So there are 3 things I took away from both these books to provide a genuine ego feeding to the person you're speaking to. And this does not have to be a negative thing. The very first aspect is when we try to compliment somebody and we want to ensure that it's a genuine compliment. A good way to do it is when we initiate a compliment, we want to ensure that we can ask questions that can follow from that compliment as well. To get an example, check out this clip from the Joe Rogan Experience.
What is up, man? Tom Bill you, if you're wondering. Bill you.
Bill you?
People were wondering, how do I say that? Bill you. Dude, I've eaten more of your bars than any bar ever in the history of bars, next to you in the Primal Kitchen bars.
Whoa.
That's it.
Well, I'll
so
take that as
you're
an
in
honor.
fucking lofty
Rarefied
company.
air, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Those goddamn Quest bars are the shit, especially
you.
those chocolate brownie ones.
Dude, tell me about it.
You guys nailed it with those.
Thank you.
So what was the idea behind the companies? Like some low sugar, low carb nutrition?
If you noticed, he complimented the person and then asked a question. And it's difficult to do this when our compliments are very superficial or fake, because we won't have anything to lift from. So if I tell somebody, I think your shoes look great, and let's say I don't really feel that, I'm just giving a fake compliment, it'll then be very hard for me to follow that up with a question to keep the conversation going. So that's the first filter I follow. Can I ask a question after the compliment? That will help the conversation go. The second tip that I learned from How to Win Friends and Influence People, it's a very famous chapter, and that is to just use the other person's name as much as possible without overdoing it. I noticed that even when I'm trying to pitch our service and I just use the other person's name at least 3 or 4 times, it increases the likelihood of us building some sort of rapport, even though the words I'm using and the script I'm going through is exactly the same. The book says that a person's name is the sweetest sound that they hear. So try to sprinkle the other person's name in as you're asking questions and explaining some points, no matter how casual or formal the conversation might be. And the third aspect that I took away from the book, The Art of Dealing with People, is how do you make this into a regular habit? And the book says that you can create a practice that every day you compliment 5 people. And I started to take that a little seriously. I don't compliment 5 people every day, but I've just narrowed it down to 1 person. It's easier for me to remember and execute on. This could be as simple as reaching out to my mom and telling her that I love the meal she cooked the previous night. It could be reaching out to an old friend who I saw on LinkedIn, got a new job, and just instead of commenting on that LinkedIn post, if I can personally message them or email them and congratulate them in that way, that can be considered a compliment as well. So these 3 elements help to feed ego in a much healthier way and can automatically help increase the chances of having a more likable conversation. Now, in a conversation, we also have to understand that it's not just about speaking, it's much more to do with listening. And that's where the book Never Split the Difference comes into the picture. This is written by Chris Voss, an ex-FBI hostage negotiator. So the book is actually about how to negotiate effectively, not on how to make small talk, but there's a lesson over there. It's one of the biggest lessons from the book called as tactical empathy. And that shows when you can listen in a slightly more tactical manner, it helps to reveal information from people that they otherwise might not have shared. Tactical empathy can go really deep, but I'm just going to highlight two principles from it. The first one is called as labeling. It means when somebody's telling us something, we can label what they're saying to ensure we're on the same page and to make the other person feel like we've not just heard them, but we've truly listened. So for example, if someone's telling you about how frustrated they are with their job, and they're saying things like, the amount of work they give me is unacceptable, my boss is so rude to me, they don't treat me like I'm human. So instead of saying things like, oh, that's so bad, or yeah, this happens to me as well, it sucks, we can simply label their emotion by saying, it sounds like you're quite disappointed with your job. And it sounds super simple, but this super simple statement can help to acknowledge their emotion and make them feel like they're being truly heard. And this opens the door for them to continue speaking by creating a safer environment. And the second principle is mirroring. It simply means to repeat the last few words or phrases that the other person has used. For instance, if the other person says, I'm really frustrated with the situation, we can simply mirror that and say, frustrated with this situation? Now, what's important is the tone. When we say it that way, it helps us to sound like we're questioning them, and it can prompt them to explain why they're feeling a particular way. This helps us to get more insight into their perspective and take the conversation to a more emotional level, which can lead to better flow down the line. But you're probably looking for certain things that you can copy, paste, and utilize to make a conversation more fun. Some games, some questions, or some stories. For that, there's a book you can read called Rules of the Game. Now, this is not generally a book you would talk about in such a video. The book is a successor to The Game by Neil Strauss. Strauss, how you pronounce it. And it's generally directed towards teaching men on how to talk to women and be more attractive to them. But the principles shown here, a lot of them can be applied to any conversation. Because even if you're not trying to attract anyone, we're just trying to have fun, the same rules apply. Now, the book is filled with different questions and stories and games you can utilize, but there's one that I really enjoy. It's called the 5 questions bet. So if you're speaking to somebody, you feel the conversation dying, you can bring up this game. The way you can do it is by saying, okay, I'm going to ask you 5 questions. All you have to do is ensure you answer them incorrectly. So if I ask you, what's this? You can't tell me spectacles, you have to tell me, this is a phone. 5 questions. If you win, then you get what you want. If I win, then I get what I want. Once that's set, we then get onto the questions. And while I ask you the questions, you can play along. Question 1, what's your name? Now you'll probably say a name which is not yours. Question 2, which city are you currently in? Just name a city that you're not in right now. Question 3, what color is the sky? Say any color besides the colors of the sky. Now, after you're done with these 3 questions, you want to look down and say, how many questions were those? In most cases, people will fumble over here and tell you 3. In which case they lose. But if they catch you over there, then we immediately want to go and say, man, damn, have you played this game before? And in those cases, they're much more likely to falter and say, no, I've not. In which case they again lose at the 5th question. Very rarely have I met somebody who gets through all 5 questions. So try this game out and check out Rules of the Game for many more fun games and conversations like these. But moving to a more serious conversation, topics can sometimes go very dark. And I sometimes struggle to handle conversations when they get into spaces of awkwardness. And that's why this book called Crucial Conversations really taught me some cool techniques. One of the techniques is called as mastering your stories. And it's all about understanding your thought process to help you determine why you feel about a certain person in a certain way. And here's how it goes. The author says that when we are told something, we automatically feel a certain way and hence we act in a certain manner. But there's a question, a very critical question that the author asks is, why do we tend to feel a certain way when we are told something? And that's because between what we heard and between what we felt, there is a story that we've told ourselves that adds to that feeling and hence makes us act in a certain way. I'll give you an example from the book of a girl called Maria, who's a copywriter and has a colleague called Lewis. Now the story goes wherein Maria and Lewis have worked on a presentation, they have to present it to their boss, and when the presentation is about to begin, as Maria pauses to take a breath, Lewis just takes over and completes the entire presentation, answers all the questions, presents all the slides. And when the boss looks over to Maria for her opinion, she now has nothing to say. This makes her feel very frustrated. And she starts to behave very passive-aggressively with Lewis by throwing snarky and sarcastic comments, giving the silent treatment, so on and so forth. So when Lewis takes over the presentation, Maria hears that and immediately tells herself a story, which is along the lines of, he doesn't trust my ability to communicate. He thinks they're more likely to listen to a man and he's trying to hog the spotlight for himself, which basically translates to he's a sexist and power-hungry person. So that's the story she tells herself. So automatically she feels a certain way and acts accordingly. But the book teaches us to dig deeper into these stories because they're so impactful to the way we have conversations. And one of the best ways to do that is to take a step back, analyze the stories and go back to the facts itself. In this particular example, the fact was not that Lewis is sexist or wants to hog the spotlight. The fact is that Lewis simply presented all the slides, answered all the questions, and Maria didn't do anything to interrupt or stop it. Now, once we have that as our story, which is a lot more objective, our feelings automatically become a little more driven by curiosity. And we tend to ask ourselves the question that why would somebody who's generally reasonable act in this particular manner? And that opens up our mind to having a more open dialogue and hence a crucial conversation. Because we might find that the reason why somebody behaved this way has nothing to do with you. Lewis could have been given feedback from that same boss who they presented to that, hey Lewis, you don't tend to talk much, you need to speak up more in meetings, you need to present more and showcase your communication skills. And if that is true, it has nothing to do with Maria. It has nothing to do with him being sexist or hogging the spotlight. But we can never understand the truth if we're not objective about our stories. And once you understand how you can master your internal narratives, the approach you can have to conversations, especially with people who you've had bad encounters with or awkward encounters with, it helps to start those conversations on a much cleaner level and increase the chances of you initiating a more likable relationship. And the next book is something called as Super Communicators. This is the latest book on the list. And the main thing I want to discuss here is to understand how to have a good conversation, we need to understand what type of conversation we are in. And generally, there are three regular types of conversation. The first is the most practical one, which the author describes as what is this about? In this type of conversation, we seek information and try to make decisions. The second type is more emotional, which goes under the premise of how do we feel? And the third one is more social, which answers the question, who are we? And miscommunication happens when we both are not aligned with the conversation that we're having. And the most common example is that if you're speaking to me and I think you're looking for advice, information, and decision making, whereas you're just trying to express your emotions. So we need to understand which conversation are we at. And the easiest way to do that is just by asking. An example of this is if somebody is venting to us emotionally and we're not sure whether they want advice or they just want us to be there, we can use this question. Do you want me to help you through this, or are you just looking to vent? And just asking this can help draw a lot more clarity and keep a conversation much more valuable. I have three more books to cover. One is called as How to Talk to Anyone. Now, this is one of the most famous books on small talk. It's also a relatively older book, and this book has been around for a while, but I frankly do not like this book. I find the principles too generic, things that people already know about. If you just ask ChatGPT or you can Google it, you'll find the same answers given today. Things like we should listen, we should judge, we should ask good questions, just boilerplate stuff. I don't think you'll really need to read a book for this information. It's also very superficial. It talks about things like using your body language, but doesn't really go deep into how you can utilize it effectively. Instead, a good alternative is How to Win Friends and Influence People. It has similar principles, but with much better examples and actionable points. Or second is a book called TED Talks, which will actually show you how to improve your delivery style to keep a conversation more engaging. TED Talks is written by Chris Anderson, the founder of TED, and it dives into what makes certain speeches so powerful and memorable while others are just forgotten. Now, the book is around public speaking, but since we're talking about small talk, we need to understand that the same principles that apply to public speaking can apply in a conversation as well. For example, any public speech will have three main points to it: the content, the body language, and the tonality. The better these three aspects are, the higher chance of you having a successful public speech. But the same thing applies to conversations as well. If you think about it, you need to have good content, so good things to say, good questions to ask. And the more you can enhance your body language and tonality, the more engaging a conversation will become. And with both of these, you can keep it really simple. For body language, you want to try to not close off your body and communicate like this. You want to face the three T's towards the other person: your top, your torso, and your toes. And when you're simply asking a question, don't just ask the question like this: hey, it's been long, how are you? How's it going? How's the family? Instead, you want to use facial expressions to communicate those points a little more effectively. Hey, it's been a long time. How's it going? How's the family? Now, that in itself can make a big difference to how genuine you're seeming and how much the other person would want to respond. With regard to tonality, just try to avoid having a monotone and talking like this at all times. You also want to try to be a little louder when you're communicating. Loudness can equal to clarity. Of course, we don't want to shout while doing it. We in fact interviewed a voice coach to help us enhance our tonalities. You can check out that whole interview on our channel. Here's a quick tip from it.
This is the first thing I teach all my clients, whether they need it or not. And most of the women I work with do need it. We work with your breath. And I do have a very fancy way of doing it, but I can also narrow it down to 7 words. Drop your shoulders. Breathe into your belly. Why do you drop your shoulders? When this was taught to me by a singing coach about 25 years ago, I was blown away. First of all, when we're nervous, when we're anxious, when we're upset, where do we carry it? We carry it in our shoulders. If you can consciously make an effort to always keep your shoulders super relaxed, it automatically reduces tension into your neck and jaw and face. And then when you couple that with taking breath in and literally picture it going down all the way to your diaphragm, which is a cylindrical muscle that's attached to the last ribs of your rib cage. Its job is to push air into your lungs. When we sleep, we all breathe into our bellies. But during the day, we're busy, we're on the go, we're doing several things. So we do what's called clavicular or conversational breathing, which involves a pretty tense body and lots of shallow breath. It does get to your diaphragm, but not efficiently. And our pitch naturally rises because everything is so tense when all you need to do, drop your shoulders and breathe into your belly. And then there is something that is borrowed from yogic breathing, which is just measured breath.
And the final book is The Charisma Myth. And frankly, though, I don't think you need to read the whole book here. In fact, I think it's on the 10th page. It's very early on in the book. There are 3 lessons which it just provided me the biggest takeaway. And here they are. Try to lower the intonation of your voice at the end of a sentence. So for example, when you're speaking, try to not speak like this and make every statement sound like a question. Instead, try to end on a lower. Second, reduce how quickly and often you nod. A lot of people, when someone's talking, we tend to go like, And we've been taught that that's a good way to listen because it encourages the other person to speak. But doing that excessively can make it feel like we're just waiting for the other person to end their talk so that we can respond. And lastly, pause for 2 seconds before you speak. This is a direct principle of articulation. When we impulsively speak and try to go really quickly when somebody asks a question, it does not give our mind enough time to organize our thoughts, and hence our communication comes across in a very scattered manner. But 2 seconds is enough time for our mind to gather information and help us speak in a more articulate format. In fact, if you want to learn how to become a more articulate speaker that will not only help you in small talk, but in any area of your life, I highly recommend you check out different mental models that you can utilize to speak in a more structured manner. You can watch the whole video that we've created right here.